Before we write a single line of code, I want to give you a general overview of what data visualization is and why it's important. This course focuses on the code only, but it's important to understand some of the fundamental concepts I'm about to present, as it'll help you better approach your projects. So the question is, what is data visualization? Data visualization is the ability to convey a story or an idea as efficiently as possible. As the old saying goes, a picture is worth 1,000 words. It's so that the end user can better understand a situation or story. As a result, the data visualization should allow the user to make an informative decision or just learn something new. Data visualizations can also help us explore patterns. Looking at a spreadsheet or table of data makes it harder for users to visualize patterns. Without a proper visualization, we could end up missing small disruptions in our data, which is even worse. So data visualization is an absolutely important part of data science. If we were to break down most visualizations, we would find that most visualizations are made up of shapes, colors, and size. With just these three building blocks, we give the user insight about the data they're viewing. It's important to note just how much of an impact a visualization can make. Hopefully, you're given a job to present data in an unbiased and non-leading way. It's our job to present the data that's easy to understand and not necessarily sway them one way or another. I'm starting to jump into a gray area, so I'll leave it at that. Let's move forward. So now that we understand what data visualization is and its benefits, let's explore what makes a good data visualization. Here are 5 tips for making a great visualization. First, before you write a single line of code, it's important to understand the context of the data visualization. You need to ask yourself the following questions. Who is the audience? What do they need to know? What do they need to do with the data? It's important you answer these questions before you start writing anything. Tip number 2 would be choosing an appropriate visualization. You can only choose the visual after you know who your audience is. In the resource section of this lecture, I provide a link to a blog post about how someone chose a visual for a certain project. Be sure you read this so you can better understand the process. The site VizWiz is also a great resource for learning data visualizations, and I highly recommend you check it out. Alright, let's move forward. The next tip for creating a good visualization is removing clutter or unnecessary information. When you receive data, there is a probability that the data may have information that's not important for visual display. This tends to be common in maps. You'll have data that contains the coordinates and names of the area you're drawing. Along with the data, you may have types which aren't supposed to be displayed visually. Later in this course, you'll understand what types are, but for now just understand there are some situations where certain data shouldn't be displayed. Anyway, sometimes you have data that's more important than others, so you may prioritize it visually, and push other data to the side for the user to look at later. This leads me to tip number 4. Draw attention using shapes, size, and color. If you have something that the user should primarily focus on, then don't be afraid to make it larger or make that piece of data stand out. It's a very straightforward tip, but a lot of data visual designers really don't bother making their visuals more interesting. Tip number 5 is to make sure your data tells a story. This is something you'll learn through experience and by studying other data visualizations. Some of the greatest data visuals out there tell a story. In the resource section of this lecture, I provide a link to a blog post by Google about the importance of telling a story with data. At the very beginning, there's a quote here which really resonates with me and summarizes why telling a story is important. Most organizations recognize that being a successful data-driven company requires skilled developers and analysts. Fewer grasp how to use data to tell a meaningful story that resonates both intellectually and emotionally with an audience. Marketers are responsible for the story. As such, they're often the bridge between the data and those who need to learn something from it, or make decisions based on its analysis. As marketers, we can tailor the story to the audience and effectively use data visualization to complement our narrative. We know that data is powerful but with a good story, it's unforgettable. Read the rest of this article and watch the video to help you better understand this tip. So we've gone over what data visualization is. Let's talk about how D3 plays into all of this. D3 stands for Data-Driven Documents. I would say that's a great description for what D3 does. D3 helps you close the gap between the data and the visualization. In order to create visualizations on the web, you need to be able to calculate a lot of things such as size, position, color, text, etc. This gets even harder when you bring interactivity to your graphs. D3 assists you by providing a set of functions for displaying your data onto the document. The documents being the web page the user views on their browser. D3 is very specific on how you should go about creating data visualizations. It's in the name. You basically have two main parts. You have the data itself, and then you have the document. The data is what drives the visualization. It should never be the other way around. Your visualization should represent the data no matter what it looks like or how it's structured. Your visualization should not determine if the data itself changes. For example, if you have extra space or room on your graph, then that shouldn't mean the visualization should add something to the data itself. Instead, the visual needs to be adjusted, not the data. Throughout this course, we'll tackle projects in a certain process. We start off with retrieving the data and preparing some settings. Then, we'll prepare any functions we'll need. Then, we begin drawing everything onto the page using the data and the functions. Lastly, we'll add any interactivity if there should be any. You'll get a lot of practice with this process, so don't worry if you don't fully understand. Before I finish this lecture, let's explore some examples of good and bad visualizations. Let's start with some bad ones. This first example is pretty straightforward. It's a pie chart that shows you how much gold is distributed among countries. As you can tell, it doesn't provide much information visually, which just makes it terrible. This next example has too much visual information. It really doesn't highlight what's important, and there's simply too much clutter. This is an example of too much clutter and possibly a wrong choice for a visual. Since there's so much data, the author should have picked a graph that handles this much data. This next example is an example of data that is accurately represented but is extremely misleading. And this graph is comparing two CPUs by measuring the FPS in a particular game. The difference is only one frame, but this makes it seem like one CPU is vastly superior to the other. If you're not tech savvy with this stuff, then I'll fill you in. One frame isn't actually that big of a difference. In some scenarios, for certain data, a one number difference can be huge. However, in this example, a single frame isn't a big deal. If the frame difference was in tens, then it would make sense, but this is simply misleading. Let's explore some examples of nicely designed graphs. In the resource section of this lecture, I provide a link to a blog post about the repetitiveness in pop lyrics. This post is just filled with great visualizations and examples. The color choice is great, and everything fits nicely. They even took the time to make the post interact with the graphs itself. Let's look at one more. In the resource section of this lecture, I provide a link to a post about the US workforce and what it looks like now. Another great post where as you scroll down, the visual changes. Even if you're not interested in the data itself, the visual is something worth looking at. It can show you what you can do with data visualizations and how you can tell incredible stories. Alright, that's it for now. That does it for this section. In the next few sections, we'll begin coding and learning about the wonderful world of D3. I hope to see you there.